I was driving to the airport when I realized my passport was still at home. But when I went back inside and heard my husband talking upstairs, I froze. I crept closer, and what I heard made my hands shake and my heart turn to ice. Sound of a subtle, unsettling ambient hum, fading out as narration begins. Can you imagine discovering your entire marriage was a carefully crafted lie, not through a whispered rumor, but from your own husband's lips? What if the man you vowed forever to was actively planning your complete destruction, and you stumbled upon it by accident, just steps away? My hands were shaking, my heart turned to ice. Just moments before, I'd kissed him goodbye, convinced he was the love of my life. But a forgotten passport and a casual conversation changed everything. It started like any other frantic morning. I was halfway to JFK, mentally already in London, rehearsing my keynote for this massive cybersecurity conference I'd been prepping for 6 months. I reached into my bag, a jolt of panic, then a sickening realization: my passport. Still on my nightstand. Catastrophic, right? I immediately whipped the car around, calculating flight delays, desperately hoping I could still make it. Driving back to Brooklyn Heights, I saw our brownstone. The front door was unlocked. That should have been my first red flag, honestly. Jackson never left doors unlocked. But I was so focused on that passport, on getting back on the road, I just brushed it off. Then I heard his voice from upstairs. And the tone, it just stopped me cold. He was talking to someone with this casual intimacy, discussing property transfers, foreclosure proceedings, and how easy it had been to deceive me. My legal training, the very thing that made me chief risk officer of my own company, kicked in. It overrode every impulse to scream, to run up those stairs and confront him. Gather information first. I moved closer to the staircase, placing each foot with excruciating care. And what I heard in the next 60 seconds, it didn't just make my hands shake, it turned my heart to solid ice. My husband was not who I thought he was. Our marriage was not what I believed it to be. And I was standing in my own home, listening to him plan my complete destruction while he thought I was safely on my way to another continent. The drive back to the brownstone had taken 25 minutes. Every second, I was replaying the morning in my head, searching for signs, for clues I'd missed. Jackson had woken up before me, like he always did on my travel days. He was in the kitchen, making my favorite French toast with cinnamon, my coffee already brewed and poured into my travel mug. He'd kissed me, his hand resting on the small of my back, and told me he'd miss me terribly. And I had believed every single word. Why wouldn't I? 7 years of marriage, not a single reason to doubt his love, his sincerity. This London conference, it was everything. For years ago, when my dad died suddenly, I was 28. Law degree, zero experience running a tech company. Everyone expected me to sell Thornfield Security Solutions, the company he'd built from the ground up in a Red Hook warehouse. Offers poured in. Competitors circled like vultures, assuming grief and inexperience would make me an easy target. Instead, I'd poured my soul into it, transformed it. We now protected Fortune 500 companies, had 40 employees, offices in 3 cities. My dad would have been so proud. This keynote was my moment to prove I belonged. To prove a woman could lead in a field that constantly questioned my credentials. Jackson had been there through all of it. We met at a legal conference just 6 months after my father died. I was drowning. In grief, in responsibility. He approached me after my presentation on data protection. He seemed genuinely interested, asking intelligent questions. He was handsome, understated, with kind blue eyes that, I thought, truly saw me, not just the professional facade I wore. Our courtship was natural, unhurried. Long conversations, evenings spent cooking while I worked late. He never complained about my crazy hours, never made me choose. He supported me, encouraged me. He became the person I trusted most in the world. When he proposed in the Finger Lakes, I said yes without a single hesitation. Our wedding was small, intimate, in my mother's garden. He cried when he saw me. My heart nearly burst. My mother whispered that my father would have loved him, that she was grateful I'd found someone to take care of me. And he did seem to take care of my mother. She lived alone in the Cobble Hill brownstone where I grew up. 3 generations of family history, embedded in every room. After Dad died, she struggled. Rental units, tenant issues, repairs, taxes. It was overwhelming. Jackson volunteered. Weekends spent fixing faucets, reviewing financial documents that made her eyes glaze over. I was so grateful. He was patient with her in ways I sometimes struggled to be. So when he suggested consolidating family accounts, making management easier, it sounded like a thoughtful solution from someone who genuinely cared. My mother signed the power of attorney documents he prepared, trusting him completely. I countersigned them without reading the fine print. Too busy with a major client presentation. Too trusting of my own husband. We handed him the keys to everything my parents had built, and neither of us had any idea what we were really doing. Now, I stood in our foyer, hand gripping the banister. Jackson's voice drifted down from his third-floor office. And the tone, it was sickening. Satisfaction, almost pleasure, as he discussed property transfers with someone he called sweetheart. The word made my chest tighten. He never called me sweetheart. Honey babe, but never sweetheart. That belonged to someone else. My legal training took over again. Gather information. Never make accusations without evidence. Jackson was saying how I'd just left for the airport. How the stupid woman had believed the London story. Each word felt like a physical assault, devastating in its impact. He talked about documents being ready. My mother's house in foreclosure by Tuesday. How I'd signed everything myself, even thanked him for helping manage family finances. I gripped the banister harder, knuckles white. My mother's house, the place that held every memory, every piece of my father we had left. He talked about it like it was just another property, another asset to liquidate. Then he said the words that changed everything. After all these years of pretending to love that frigid, controlling woman, I am finally going to get what I deserve, what we both deserve, sweetheart. Pretending. 7 years of marriage. Reduced to a performance. 7 years of my love, met with a contempt I had been too blind to see. I stood there and felt something fundamental shift inside me. A death. A rebirth. The woman who'd walked out of this house 40 minutes ago no longer existed. She was trusting, loving, perhaps even naive. The woman standing here now? She was different. Colder. Her mind was already working through the implications, with the same analytical precision I applied to cybersecurity threats at work. Jackson believed I was gone. He thought he had 5 days to finalize his scheme while I was blissfully ignorant across an ocean. He had no idea I was 20 feet below him, listening to every word, my legal mind cataloging evidence, constructing strategy. My hands were shaking, yes, but not from fear. Not even heartbreak. They were shaking from a rage that felt like electricity, from the sudden, cold determination to make Jackson pay for every single lie. Every instinct screamed at me to run up those stairs, confront him, demand answers. But my training held me. Evidence first. Understanding second. Action third. I moved closer to the staircase, deliberately, carefully. The third step from the bottom always groaned. The landing halfway up had a loose board. 7 years in this house had taught me its language. Now, that knowledge was my protection. Jackson's voice carried clearly. No, don't worry, he was saying, his tone reassuring in a way that made my stomach churn. By the time she gets back, everything will be locked down. Her mother's brownstone will be in foreclosure by Tuesday. The old woman doesn't even check her accounts anymore. My mother's brownstone. Worth nearly $2 million, but its value went far beyond money. 3 generations. My grandmother died there. My father proposed to my mother in that garden. My first steps were on those floors. Every brick held a memory. And Jackson was discussing it casually, like a mere transaction. And the best part, he continued, a smile audible in his voice, she signed everything herself, every single document. She actually thanked me for helping manage the family properties. The memory came rushing back. 8 months ago. A stack of papers on the kitchen table. He'd said consolidating accounts would make it easier for my mother, who was getting confused. I was preparing for a huge client presentation, laptop open, mind halfway through security protocols. I signed where he indicated. Without reading. Trusting him completely. Because he was my husband. And why would my husband hurt me? After all these years of pretending to love that frigid, controlling woman, Jackson said, his voice hardening, I'm finally going to get what I deserve, what we both deserve, sweetheart. Sweetheart. He was talking to someone else. Not his wife. His partner. His co-conspirator. The betrayal doubled in that instant, multiplying into something I could barely comprehend. This wasn't just theft. This wasn't just fraud. This was an intimate violation by someone I had shared my bed with, trusted with my body, my heart, my family's legacy. I heard him laugh. That genuine amusement I thought I inspired. The laugh I'd fallen in love with. Now I understood. It had never been for me. Maybe nothing had ever been for me. Maybe I'd been living with a stranger who wore my husband's face, performing affection with practiced skill while feeling nothing but contempt. She'll land in London completely clueless, Jackson continued. I've already scheduled the bank appointments for tomorrow morning. Foreclosure auction Tuesday. By Wednesday, we'll control the property and flip it immediately. Market in Cobble Hill is insane. Clean $700,000 profit. $700,000. That's what my mother's home was worth to him. Not memories, not history, not the fact that an elderly woman who'd already lost her husband would lose her home. Just numbers. I know, baby, he said, his voice softening with an affection that made my chest physically ache. Just a few more days and we're done. We can finally stop pretending and get out of here. Maybe somewhere warm this time. You've been talking about Costa Rica. We could do that. Buy something on the beach. The life we've been planning for all these years. Costa Rica. The beach house. The life they'd been planning. While I worked 60-hour weeks building a company. While I trusted him. He'd been planning an escape with another woman, to steal everything, disappear, and leave me with nothing but the wreckage of a life I thought was real. I should have collapsed. Devastated. Instead, something else happened. Something cold, sharp, focused. The shock crystallized into purpose. My mind began working, analyzing implications like a cybersecurity threat. Jackson thought I was at the airport, boarding a flight. He had no idea I was here. That ignorance? It was my weapon. My temporary advantage. I heard him moving around upstairs. I should go, he said to the woman on the phone. Got to meet the attorney this afternoon to finalize the paperwork. I'll call you tonight. Love you, baby. Love you. He told her he loved her with the same casual ease most people say goodbye. How many times had he said those words to me, meaning nothing? How many intimate moments were just performances? I heard the click of his phone. Silence. He was probably reviewing documents, checking his timeline. No reason to suspect anything was wrong. No reason to believe his perfect scheme had just been exposed by something as mundane as a forgotten passport. I backed away from the stairs with the same careful precision I'd used to approach. The floorboard near the coat closet. The slight squeak by the door. I avoided them all, moving like a ghost through my own home, until I reached the front door and slipped through. The soft click behind me sounded like a gunshot. I walked to my car with measured steps, though every nerve screamed to run. My hands fumbled with the keys. Twice I tried, before the door finally unlocked. Inside, I sat motionless, staring at our brownstone, trying to reconcile the building I loved with the crime scene it had become. My phone sat in the cup holder. I picked it up, watching the screen blur as tears finally came. Not tears of sadness. Tears of rage. So intense they burned my eyes. I had built a life with this man. Trusted him with everything. Believed in our future. But crying wouldn't help. Falling apart wouldn't protect my mother, save her home, or recover what he'd stolen. I needed to think. Move strategically. Become someone Jackson never anticipated I could be. The woman who'd left 40 minutes ago would have confronted him, demanded explanations, believed his lies. That woman was gone. The woman in this car now understood she was at war. And the first rule of war? Never let your enemy know you're coming. I started the engine, forcing myself to drive at a normal speed, even as every instinct screamed to floor it. My hands gripped the steering wheel, fingers aching. The pain grounded me, kept me focused on what was next. Jackson believed I was checking in for my flight, boarding a plane. That belief was my only advantage. I had to protect it. I couldn't go home. Couldn't contact him. Couldn't do anything that would alert him. I drove through Brooklyn, no destination in mind at first, just moving. After 10 minutes on autopilot, I found myself in a coffee shop parking lot in Park Slope, 3 neighborhoods away. A place Jackson would never think to look. The coffee shop was quiet. I chose a booth in the back where I could see the entrance but stay hidden. My hands were still shaking as I pulled out my phone. I needed help, but strategically. The wrong move now could destroy everything. Deep breaths. Years of managing crisis at work had taught me, panic is the enemy of effective action. Asterisk assessment first. Strategy second. Implementation third. Asterisk my first call went to Diana, my executive assistant. She answered on the second ring, professionally efficient. Mia, you should be boarding soon. Is everything okay? I need you to do something for me, I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. And I need you not to ask questions right now. Can you do that? A brief pause. I could almost hear her processing. Diana had worked for me for 6 years. She knew when something was genuinely wrong. Of course. What do you need? Call the conference organizers in London. Tell them I've had a family emergency and cannot attend. Then I need you to cover for me at the office. If anyone asks where I am, tell them I'm at the conference as scheduled. Unreachable except by email. Another pause, longer. Mia, what's going on? Are you safe? That simple question nearly shattered my composure. Diana wasn't just an employee, she was a friend. Someone who noticed when I was stressed, who brought me coffee, who covered for me. The concern in her voice made tears prick my eyes, but I forced them back. I'm safe, I managed. I promise I'll explain everything soon. But right now, I need you to trust me and do exactly what I'm asking. You're in London, Diana said quietly. Got it, Mia. Whatever's happening, I've got your back. I ended the call before my voice could break. One step completed. Now for the harder part. Vanessa, my college roommate. She'd seen me through my dad's death, through those terrifying early months of running Thornfield when I had no idea what I was doing. After graduation, she became a forensic accountant, specializing in tracking hidden assets and uncovering financial fraud. If anyone could help me understand the scope of what Jackson had done, it was Vanessa. She answered on the first ring. Mia, I thought you were flying to London today. I need your help, I said. This time, I couldn't keep the tremor out of my voice. And I need absolute confidentiality. Can you come to Brooklyn right now? What's wrong? You sound strange. Please, Vanessa, I can't explain over the phone. Can you come? I'm in my office in Manhattan. I can be there in 30 minutes. Where? I gave her the coffee shop address and hung up. Ordered a coffee I had no intention of drinking, just to justify occupying the booth. The young barista smiled at me with an automatic friendliness that felt completely disconnected from my reality. I carried the cup back, watching the steam twist and dissipate. Vanessa arrived in 28 minutes. Her red hair pulled back professionally, her expression shifting from concern to alarm as she slid into the booth and got a good look at my face. Talk to me, she said simply. So I told her everything. The conversation about property transfers and foreclosures. My mother's brownstone being sold out from under her. The documents I'd signed without understanding. The woman Jackson called sweetheart. By the time I finished, Vanessa's alarm had transformed into the cold, professional focus I'd seen her use analyzing financial records in court. We need to look at your accounts, she said, already pulling her laptop from her bag. All of them. Joint accounts, investment portfolios, property holdings. Everything. And we need to do it right now, before he has any chance to realize. You know, I can access most of it from my phone, I said, pulling up my banking app with fingers that still trembled slightly. What we discovered over the next 2 hours made the initial shock of overhearing Jackson's conversation seem almost quaint. Vanessa worked with methodical precision, guiding me through accounts I'd barely looked at in months, because I'd trusted my husband to manage our finances. Trust. That word kept echoing in my head, with increasingly bitter irony. The joint checking account looked normal at first. My salary, normal expenses. But when Vanessa examined the transaction history, patterns emerged that made my stomach turn. Small transfers, $1,500 to $3,000, every few weeks for 18 months. Amounts carefully calibrated to stay below fraud alerts. Where's this money going? I asked, watching her fingers fly across the keyboard. An account registered to something called Hearthstone Properties, she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Give me a few minutes. I need to make some calls. She stepped outside, speaking in the abbreviated shorthand of forensic specialists. I sat alone, watching her through the window. 3 calls. Each one longer. Her expression grew grimmer. When she finally came back inside, I knew. Mia, she said carefully. Jackson Rohr Brennan is not his real name. Or rather, Brennan isn't his original surname. She turned her laptop screen towards me. I stared at a criminal record. Jackson Rohr. Convicted of investment fraud in Connecticut 8 years ago. 2 years in minimum security. Released on parole, immediately filed for a legal name change. A fresh identity. To avoid background checks. 8 years ago. 1 year before I met him at that legal conference. 1 year before he approached me after my presentation with what I'd believed was genuine interest. Everything had been calculated from the very first moment. There's more, Vanessa said quietly. She pulled up social media profiles. A woman named Sienna Hartley, 26, blonde, beautiful. Her Instagram feed was filled with luxury vacations, designer purchases. And there, partially obscured in a beach photo, but unmistakable, Jackson. She's his partner, Vanessa said. They're co-owners of Hearthstone Properties. And Mia, they've done this before. My phone buzzed around midnight. A text from Jackson. The screen glowed in the darkness of my hotel room. I'd checked into a lower Manhattan hotel under Diana's name. Asterisk, missing you already. Hope the flight wasn't too rough. Call me when you land tomorrow morning. Asterisk, he'd even added a heart emoji. That small digital symbol that now felt like mockery. I didn't respond immediately. I calculated time differences, thinking about when someone arriving in London would realistically call. Every detail mattered now. Every action had to support the fiction that I was exactly where he believed me to be. But sleep wouldn't come. I lay in that unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about my mother. She would be asleep in her brownstone, completely unaware that the home she'd lived in for 40 years was being stolen from her. Jackson had scheduled the foreclosure auction for Tuesday. Today was Thursday. 5 days. I had 5 days to stop it. Morning arrived, gray light filtering through the curtains. I showered, dressed mechanically, then drove to Cobble Hill before I could second-guess myself. My mother was an early riser. I knew I'd find her awake. The brownstone looked exactly as it always had. I sat in my car, gathering courage for a conversation I desperately did not want to have. How do you tell your mother that the man she trusted, the man who'd fixed her leaky faucets and reviewed her bank statements with such apparent kindness, had been systematically robbing her? She answered the door in her bathrobe, surprise and pleasure on her face. Mia, sweetheart, what are you doing here? I thought you were flying to London yesterday. Change of plans, Mom. Can I come in? She stepped aside, already moving towards the kitchen to make coffee, that automatic hospitality ingrained in her. I followed her through rooms filled with furniture that had witnessed 3 generations of family life. Past photos of my father, frozen in moments of happiness. Is everything all right? She asked, setting 2 mugs on the counter. You look tired. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest, I said. Can you show me any paperwork Jackson has given you recently? Anything related to the house or your bank accounts? Her expression shifted to confusion. What's this about, Mia? Please, Mom, just show me what you have. She disappeared into the small office, Dad's old space, and returned with a folder. I spread the documents across the kitchen table. My stomach dropped. Page after page of legal paperwork my mother had signed without understanding. Jackson had refinanced the brownstone 18 months ago, taking out a new mortgage almost double the original balance. He'd also opened a home equity line of credit for an additional $200,000. The documents were sophisticated, filled with legal language. Jackson had explained them as routine updates, lowering her monthly expenses, simplifying things. You said this would make things easier, my mother said quietly, watching me read. You said the payments would go down. I never said that, Mom. Jackson said that. But he signed it right here. She pointed to a signature line. My own name, written in handwriting close enough to pass casual inspection, but not quite right in the details. The forgery was good. Professional. The work of someone who had practiced. When did he have you sign these? I asked. About 1.5 years ago. He brought them by when you were traveling for work. Said you'd already reviewed everything, approved it. He just needed my signature to finalize. She looked at me, tears in her eyes. I trusted him, Mia. He's your husband. Why wouldn't I trust him? I pulled up my banking app, accessed her accounts. What I found made the room tilt. The refinancing had generated over $300,000 in cash. Money that should have been deposited into her account. Instead, it had vanished into accounts registered to Hearthstone Properties, Vanessa's shell company. The monthly mortgage payments hadn't been made in 4 months. Late fees. Penalties. The bank had filed foreclosure proceedings 2 weeks ago, sending notices to a P.O. box Jackson controlled. Mom, I said carefully. When was the last time you actually received a bank statement in the mail? She thought about it, confusion deepening. Jackson said he had everything switched to electronic statements to save paper. Said he'd review them and let me know if there were any problems. Of course he had. Intercepted every piece of communication. She had been living in her home, completely unaware she was about to lose it. Your house is in foreclosure, I told her, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. The auction is scheduled for Tuesday. The color drained from her face. She sat heavily in a kitchen chair, gripping the table edge. That's not possible. Jackson said everything was fine. Jackson has been stealing from you, Mom. From both of us. And I'm going to stop him. But I need you to trust me now and not contact him about any of this. Can you do that? She nodded slowly, tears tracking down her face. And I felt rage burn through me with renewed intensity. This wasn't just about money. This was about destroying an elderly woman's sense of security, taking advantage of her grief, her vulnerability. I spent the next 2 hours with her, going through every document, photographing everything. Then I called Vanessa, giving her the information to trace where the money had gone, to document the fraud. My mother sat in silence, occasionally wiping tears, struggling to process the reality that the man who'd seemed so helpful had been systematically robbing her. I should have paid more attention, she said finally. I should have asked more questions. This is not your fault, Mom. Jackson is a professional. This is what he does. He targets people who are vulnerable and trusting. He manipulates them so skillfully they never see it coming. But even as I said those words, I felt the weight of my own guilt. I had brought Jackson into our lives. I had vouched for him, trusted him, given him access to everything that mattered. If anyone should have seen through his performance, it should have been me. That afternoon, I drove to Martin's office, the corporate attorney who had handled Thornfield's legal matters since my father started the company. I'd called ahead, telling him I needed to see him urgently, privately, not at the office where employees might mention it to Jackson. Martin's office was on the 42nd floor of a glass tower overlooking the East River. Polished surfaces, expensive art, projecting confidence. He met me in a private conference room, his expression grave as I laid out everything Vanessa had discovered about Jackson's true identity and the scope of his fraud. I need to know if the company is vulnerable, I told him, spreading documents across the table. If he's been stealing from me personally and from my mother, what's to stop him from going after Thornfield? Martin reviewed the papers, alarm growing. These are good, he said quietly. Really good. Someone with inside knowledge of your corporate paperwork created these. He pulled up digital files, comparing the forged documents to legitimate ones. The similarities were disturbing. Jackson had gained access to corporate templates, authorization forms, insurance documents. If he presents these to the right people, Martin said, he could potentially freeze company assets, make a claim against the business in a divorce. He might even be able to position himself as having a stake in the company through some of these forged authorizations. My father's legacy. Everything I'd built over 4 years of relentless work. All of it vulnerable because I had trusted the wrong person. What do we do? I asked. We filed protective orders immediately. Emergency injunctions preventing any transfer of corporate assets or ownership claims. I'll have them drafted and filed within 2 hours. I left Martin's office feeling slightly less powerless, but no less angry. Jackson hadn't just targeted me. He had targeted everything and everyone I cared about. My mother. My company. My father's legacy. That evening, I returned to my hotel room and did something I'd been avoiding. I called Jackson. Not from my regular phone, but from a burner device Vanessa had purchased for me, routing the call through a VPN so it would appear I was calling from London. Every detail had to be perfect. Every element of the performance flawless. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm with what I now recognized as manufactured affection. Hey babe, how was your first day at the conference? I forced myself to sound tired but enthusiastic, like someone after a long day of presentations. Exhausting but good. The keynote this morning was fascinating. Quantum encryption protocols. Took so many notes my hands cramping. Sounds like you, he said with a laugh that used to make me smile. Always the perfectionist. Did you get a chance to eat anything or were you too busy impressing everyone? The casual intimacy made my skin crawl, but I maintained my composure. Grabbed a sandwich between sessions. The time difference is hitting me harder than I expected. I think I'm going to turn in early tonight. Good idea. Get some rest. I miss you. Miss you too, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I'll call you tomorrow after my presentation. After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone, marveling at how easily the deception had come. Was this what Jackson felt every time he spoke to me? This strange disconnect between the words and the reality? The thought made me sick, but I pushed it aside. Time for emotional damage control later. Right now, strategy. The next morning, Friday, I met Vanessa at a different coffee shop, this one in the financial district, near where Sienna lived. Vanessa had spent 2 days tracing every financial thread of Jackson's operation. The picture she'd assembled was staggering. $647,000, she said, sliding a folder across the table. That's how much they've taken from you and your mother combined. But there's more, in accounts tied to previous victims. I estimate they've stolen close to $2 million over the past decade. $2 million. Multiple lives destroyed. And for what? Luxury apartments, expensive vacations, while victims struggled to rebuild. I found something else, Vanessa continued, her expression grim. Rachel Montgomery, the doctor in Connecticut, she's not the first victim. There was a woman before her. Patricia Ellis, an investment banker in Boston. Jackson and Sienna took her for nearly $800,000 9 years ago. After they disappeared with her money, Patricia tried to rebuild, but the stress triggered a heart condition she didn't know she had. She died 6 months later. She was 39 years old. The folder contained photos Vanessa had pulled from old social media and news articles. Patricia Ellis smiling at a charity gala. Patricia Ellis's obituary, listing a heart attack as cause of death, but making no mention of the fraud that preceded it. They killed her, I said quietly. Maybe not directly, but they killed her just the same. And Lauren Prescott killed herself after they destroyed her, Vanessa added. Mia, these people aren't just thieves. They're predators who leave bodies behind them. If we don't stop them now, completely and permanently, they'll just do this again to someone else. I knew she was right. Protecting myself and my mother wasn't enough. This had to end in a way that ensured Jackson and Sienna could never hurt anyone again. That afternoon, I did something even Vanessa thought was risky. I went to Sienna's apartment. I'd prepared carefully, professional attire, a leather portfolio with a hidden recording device. When I knocked, I wore an expression of friendly professionalism that gave away nothing of the rage burning beneath the surface. Sienna answered, wearing designer athleisure that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was even more striking in person, with that effortless beauty that comes from expensive maintenance and genetic luck. Her expression was cautious, the weariness of someone who lived a life built on deception, who learned to evaluate threats quickly. Can I help you? She asked, not opening the door fully. I hope so. My name is Jennifer Ross. I'm a freelance journalist writing a feature about young entrepreneurs in the property investment space. Your name came up in my research. I was hoping you might have a few minutes to talk about your success with Hearthstone Properties. I watched her expression shift. Caution to interest. Greed and vanity, the twin weaknesses that make con artists vulnerable to being conned. She opened the door wider. Her apartment was exactly what I'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Furniture from design magazines. Art that was either very expensive or very good reproductions. Everything screamed money. And I knew, with certainty, none of it had been earned honestly. Honestly, I'm always happy to talk about my work, Sienna said, settling onto a white leather sofa, gesturing for me to sit. What specifically would you like to know? I asked her questions about property investment, her business model, her success at such a young age. She answered with practiced smoothness, weaving a story about market research and smart investments and calculated risks. Every word was a lie, but she delivered them with complete confidence. After about 15 minutes, I shifted the conversation. I'm particularly interested in how you identify undervalued properties. What's your process for finding opportunities other investors might miss? Well, it's really about understanding human psychology, she said, warming to the topic. People make emotional decisions about property, especially when they're in vulnerable situations. If you can identify those situations early, you can position yourself to acquire assets at below market value. Vulnerable situations. She was describing her victims without even realizing it. That's fascinating, I said, leaning forward slightly. Can you give me a specific example? Nothing confidential, of course, but maybe a general scenario. She hesitated for a moment, calculating, but the flattery won out. Okay, so for instance, there's a property in Cobble Hill we're closing on next week. The owner is an elderly woman who got overwhelmed managing the building after her husband died. We helped her refinance to make things easier. And now we're positioned to acquire the property at the foreclosure auction for about 60% of its market value. Once we flip it, we're looking at a profit of around $700,000. My mother's house. She was sitting in her luxury apartment, discussing the theft of my mother's home with the casual indifference of someone describing a routine business transaction. The recording device in my portfolio captured every word. That's impressive, I said, keeping my voice neutral despite the fury building in my chest. And you do this with a partner, correct? Jackson Brennan. Jackson roar, she corrected automatically, then caught herself. I mean, yes, Jackson Brennan. We've been working together for years. I pulled out my phone and opened it to a photograph. Not of Sienna and Jackson, but of Patricia Ellis and Lauren Prescott. The two victims whose lives had ended because of what Jackson and Sienna had done. Do you recognize these women? I asked, holding the phone where she could see the screen. Her face went pale. "Who are you?" "My name is not Jennifer Ross. It's Mia Thornfield. And that property in Cobble Hill you're planning to steal? That's my mother's house. The one you and Jackson have been systematically robbing while he pretended to be my husband." She stood up quickly, backing towards the door. "I think you need to leave." "These women are dead," I continued, my voice remaining calm despite the emotions churning inside me. "Patricia Ellis and Lauren Prescott. Dead because of what you and Jackson did to them." "How many others, Sienna? How many lives have you destroyed?" "Get out of my apartment," she said, her voice rising. "Get out or I'm calling the police." "Please do," I said, standing but not moving towards the door. "I'd love to explain to the police exactly what you and Jackson have been doing. I have documentation of everything. Bank records, forged documents, evidence of your previous victims. I've spent the last 5 days building a case that will put both of you in prison for a very long time." Her hand was on her phone, but she hadn't dialed. I could see her mind working, calculating her options, finding them all closed off. "Or," I continued, "you could cooperate. Tell me everything. Every detail of your operation, every account where you've hidden money, every victim you've targeted. Do that, and maybe I'll mention your cooperation when I speak to the district attorney." She stared at me for a long moment. I saw the exact instant when her survival instinct overrode her loyalty to Jackson. "I want a lawyer," she said. "And I want immunity. That's not my decision to make. But I can tell you that the district attorney will be a lot more interested in talking to you if you provide information before Jackson executes tomorrow morning than after. Right now you're co-conspirators. But if you flip on him first, you become a witness instead of just another defendant." She picked up her phone but didn't dial immediately. She stared at the screen as if it might provide answers. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "How long have you known?" 5 days. I came home for my passport and heard Jackson on the phone with you, discussing how stupid I was and how easy it had been to fool me. I've spent every moment since then building a case against both of you." She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than calculation. Fear. Genuine, undisguised. "He said you were in London." That's what he believes. That's what everyone believes. Except the people helping me build the case against him. Against both of you. "I want a deal," she said abruptly. "Full immunity in exchange for everything I know. That's not my decision to make. But I can tell you that the district attorney will be a lot more interested in talking to you if you provide information before Jackson executes tomorrow morning than after. Right now you're co-conspirators. But if you flip on him first, you become a witness instead of just another defendant." She made her call then, to a lawyer whose name I didn't recognize, speaking in hushed tones. The conversation lasted several minutes. When she hung up, some of the fear had been replaced by a harder expression. She'd made a decision. "My attorney says I should not talk to you without him present, and without a formal agreement from the district attorney's office." "Smart lawyer," I said, standing and collecting my portfolio. "You should listen to him. But understand something, Sienna. Every hour you wait is an hour that Jackson gets closer to executing. And once he does that, your value as a cooperating witness drops significantly. Think about whether you want to go down with him or save yourself." I walked towards the door, then paused, turning back. "Patricia Ellis and Lauren Prescott. Those women are dead because of what you and Jackson did. You can't bring them back. But you can make sure there are no more victims after me. That has to mean something, even to someone like you." I left her apartment and returned to my car, where Vanessa was waiting. She'd been monitoring the recording remotely. Her expression was grim. "She's going to flip," Vanessa said. I could hear it in her voice. "She's more afraid of prison than she is loyal to Jackson." "Good," I replied. "Let her be afraid. Fear makes people tell the truth." Sunday evening arrived, with the weight of everything that was about to happen pressing down on me. I sat in my hotel room and composed a text message to Jackson, routing it through the VPN to appear as if it came from London. Simple. Ordinary. Exactly what he would expect from a wife returning from a business trip. Asterisk flight boarding soon. Should land around 8 a.m. your time. Can't wait to see you. Asterisk his response came within seconds. Asterisk can't wait to see you too. I've missed you so much. Safe flight, babe. Asterisk I stared at those words for a long time, thinking about how easily lies could be dressed up as affection. How skilled Jackson was at performing emotions he didn't feel. Then I turned off the phone. Tomorrow would require every ounce of strength and clarity I could summon. Monday morning came with gray clouds threatening rain. I woke at 5, showered, and dressed in the navy suit my father had once complimented. The one he said made me look like someone who could command respect in any room. His words steadied me as I drove through empty Brooklyn streets towards our brownstone, parking across the street where I could watch the front door without being immediately visible. Jackson emerged at 8:30, exactly on schedule. He was dressed in a charcoal suit I had bought him for our anniversary 2 years ago, carrying the leather portfolio he used for important business meetings. He looked confident, purposeful, a man who believed himself on the verge of a major success. He got into his car and pulled away. I followed at a careful distance. His first destination, the bank in Cobble Hill that held my mother's mortgage. Martin had briefed me. Jackson planned to finalize the foreclosure paperwork and arrange to purchase the property through one of his shell companies. What he didn't know was that Martin had spent the weekend coordinating with the bank's legal department, presenting evidence of fraud, securing their cooperation. I parked half a block away and watched Jackson walk through the bank's front doors. He was inside for less than 3 minutes before he came back out. Even from a distance, I could see his demeanor had changed. His confident stride was replaced by something quicker, more agitated. He was on his phone before he reached the sidewalk, his free hand gesturing sharply. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know what had happened. Martin had been waiting inside with an emergency court order staying the foreclosure, along with bank officials briefed on the fraud investigation. Jackson's perfect plan had just encountered its first major obstacle, and he was trying to understand how it happened. He got back in his car and drove towards Manhattan. I continued following. His next stop would likely be his attorney's office, or maybe he'd try to access some of the accounts he'd been planning to drain. Either way, he was about to discover that every avenue he'd carefully constructed over the past 18 months had been blocked. But I wasn't ready to confront him yet. I wanted him to spend a few more hours trying to execute his scheme, running into barrier after barrier, watching his plan collapse piece by piece. Only then would I appear. Only then would he see what his perfect victim had become. Instead, I drove back to Brooklyn Heights and let myself into our brownstone through the back entrance. I moved quietly, gathering a few items I'd need, securing copies of documents that would be evidence in the criminal case. I could hear Jackson's voice upstairs in his office, speaking on the phone with increasing frustration and urgency. "Something's wrong," he was saying. "The foreclosure was blocked. Emergency court order," they said. "And the bank accounts are frozen. Someone filed injunctions. Who could have done this? She's supposed to be in London. She doesn't even know." I climbed the stairs, not bothering to hide my footsteps this time. The third step from the bottom creaked under my weight. I heard Jackson's voice cut off mid-sentence. When I reached the doorway of his office, he was standing by his desk, phone still in hand, staring at me with an expression of complete incomprehension. "Mia? What are you doing here? Why aren't you in London?" I stepped into the office, maintaining a distance that felt safe and strategic. "I never went to London, Jackson. I came back for my passport and heard you on the phone with Sienna, planning to steal everything from me and my mother. I've spent the last 5 days building a case against you." His face went through several rapid transformations: confusion, alarm, calculation, and finally, an attempt at the concerned husband expression that had fooled me for 7 years. "I don't know what you think you heard, but you've clearly misunderstood something. Let me explain." "Stop," I said, my voice cutting through his attempt at manipulation. "I know everything, Jackson. Or should I call you Jackson Roar? That's your real name, isn't it? The one you used before you went to prison for fraud in Connecticut." He froze completely, every practiced expression falling away to reveal something raw and desperate underneath. "I know about Sienna," I continued. "I know about Patricia Ellis and Lauren Prescott and Rachel Montgomery. I know about the shell companies and the forged documents and the $600,000 you've stolen from me and my mother. And I know that right now, every account you plan to drain is frozen. Every property you plan to steal is protected. And every institution you plan to defraud has been notified about who you really are." Jackson's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. His brain visibly struggled to process what was happening. The man who had been so confident just hours earlier, who believed himself to be executing the perfect crime, was now standing in his own office, facing the complete destruction of everything he had built. "You don't understand," he finally managed, his voice taking on a pleading quality I'd never heard. "It's not what you think. Yes, I made mistakes, but I can explain everything. We can work this out together." "Stop talking," I said, my voice carrying a coldness that surprised even me. "Every word out of your mouth is another lie. And I'm done listening to lies. The police are on their way. A detective from the district attorney's office will be here within the hour. You can save your explanations for them. He took a step toward me. I instinctively moved back, my hand reaching for my phone. The movement stopped him. I saw something shift in his expression, recognition, perhaps, that the woman standing in front of him was not the person he had married. Not the trusting victim he had spent 7 years cultivating. Mia, please, just listen to me for 5 minutes. Let me explain how this happened, how things got out of control. I never meant for it to go this far. You never meant to steal $600,000 from me and my mother? You never meant to forge documents and commit fraud? You never meant to target me specifically after my father died because you saw me as vulnerable and wealthy? Which part of your decade-long pattern of destroying women's lives did you not mean to do, Jackson? His face flushed red, anger finally breaking through the desperate attempt at manipulation. You think you're so smart, don't you? Think you've won something here? You have no idea what you've done. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. Jackson Rohr, convicted fraudster, serial con artist, predator who has destroyed multiple lives and left at least 2 women dead. I know exactly who you are now. The only question is whether you understand who I am. The sound of sirens approaching made both of us turn towards the window. 3 police cars. Their lights flashing in the gray morning. Jackson's face went white as he watched officers emerge from the vehicles and approach the front door. "This is your fault," he said, turning back to me, venom in his voice. "You couldn't just let things be. You had to go digging. Had to ruin everything. We could have worked this out quietly, but you had to make it into this." "No," I said firmly. "This is your fault. Every single consequence you're about to face is the direct result of choices you made. You chose to target me. You chose to steal from my mother. You chose to build your entire life on fraud and manipulation. Own it, Jackson. For once in your miserable existence, own what you've done." The doorbell rang, followed by heavy knocking. I walked past Jackson and down the stairs to let the police inside, leaving him standing alone in his office with nowhere left to run. The arrest was quick, professional. Detective Morrison read Jackson his rights while uniformed officers secured the scene. I watched from the living room as they led Jackson down the stairs in handcuffs. His expensive suit looked rumpled, wrong on him. His face was a mask of barely controlled panic. As they walked him past me, he looked at me one final time. "I did love you," he said quietly. "At least in the beginning. That was real." "No, it wasn't," I replied. "And we both know it." They took him away. I stood in the foyer of the brownstone that had been our home, feeling nothing but a strange emptiness where I thought there should be pain, or triumph, or something more substantial than this hollow sense of conclusion. The next morning, I sat across from Detective Morrison in a conference room at the district attorney's office in downtown Brooklyn. Between us lay folders containing every piece of evidence I had gathered over the past week, organized with the same meticulous attention to detail I applied to cybersecurity assessments. "This is remarkable," Detective Morrison said, reviewing the timeline I'd constructed. "In 20 years of working fraud cases, I've never seen a victim present this level of documentation. Most people are so traumatized, they can barely function, let alone conduct an investigation." "I was traumatized," I said quietly. "But I was also angry. And I know how to conduct investigations. It's part of what I do professionally. I just applied those same skills to my personal situation." He nodded, making notes. "The recorded conversation with Sienna Hartley is particularly valuable. She admitted to knowing about the scheme, to targeting you specifically, to having done this to previous victims. That's going to be extremely difficult for her attorney to explain away. She called her lawyer after I left her apartment," I said. "I assume she's trying to negotiate some kind of deal." "She is," Detective Morrison confirmed. "Her attorney reached out yesterday afternoon. She wants full immunity in exchange for testifying against Jackson, providing documentation of their entire operation, and identifying other victims we might not know about." "Are you going to give her immunity?" He leaned back in his chair. "Probably not full immunity, but we might offer a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation. The truth is, we need her testimony to make the strongest possible case against Jackson. She can describe their methodology, explain how they researched and targeted victims, provide evidence that establishes this as an ongoing criminal enterprise rather than just individual acts of fraud. That turns this from a few years in prison into potentially decades." "Good," I said simply. "I want him in prison for as long as legally possible. Not because I'm vindictive, but because every year he spends locked up is a year he can't do this to someone else." "There's something else you should know," Detective Morrison continued, pulling another folder from his briefcase. After news of Jackson's arrest started circulating, we received calls from 3 additional women who believe they were victimized by him and Sienna. One in Pennsylvania, one in New Jersey, one in Massachusetts. The cases go back almost 12 years. We're still investigating, but the pattern is consistent with what you've documented. 12 years. More victims than even Vanessa had been able to identify. How many lives had Jackson destroyed? How many women had trusted him the way I had, only to discover too late that everything had been a performance? I want to help them, I said. The other victims. If there's anything I can do to support their cases or help them recover, I want to do it. Detective Morrison smiled slightly. I thought you might say that. I'll make sure you're connected with the Victim Services Coordinator. In the meantime, we'll be filing formal charges later today, multiple counts of fraud, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy. Jackson is looking at 15 to 20 years if convicted on all counts. The preliminary hearing was held 3 weeks later in a Brooklyn courtroom that smelled of old wood and floor polish. I sat in the gallery with my mother beside me, watching as Jackson was led in, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller, less significant than the man who had dominated my life for 7 years. His attorney, a sharp-looking woman, sat beside him, whispering instructions. The prosecutor laid out the case with clinical precision, describing the pattern of fraud that had begun more than a decade earlier. She presented evidence of forged documents, fraudulent property transfers, stolen funds totaling well over $1 million. She even played portions of the recording I had made of Sienna, her voice filling the courtroom as she described targeting vulnerable women and stealing everything they owned. Jackson sat motionless, his face carefully neutral, but I saw his hands clench when the prosecutor mentioned Patricia Ellis and Lauren Prescott. When the prosecutor finished, Jackson's attorney argued that much of the evidence was circumstantial, that my recording of Sienna had been obtained under false pretenses. The judge listened impassively, then set bail at $2 million, an amount Jackson could not possibly meet, as all his assets had been frozen. As they led him out, Jackson's eyes found mine. There was no pleading this time. No manipulation. Just cold hatred. It confirmed everything I had come to understand about who he really was. My mother reached over and squeezed my hand. Your father would be proud of you, she whispered. Not just for stopping Jackson, but for how you did it. With intelligence and strategy instead of just emotion. I squeezed back, tears pricking my eyes for the first time since this nightmare began. I wish Dad was here, I said quietly. I wish he could have protected us from this. He did protect us, my mother replied. He raised you to be strong and smart and capable of protecting yourself. That's the greatest gift a parent can give. We left the courthouse together that afternoon, walking down the stone steps into a gray November light that felt appropriate. There was no celebration, no sense of victory. Just a quiet exhaustion that came from carrying the weight of betrayal for so long and finally being allowed to set it down. What happens now? My mother asked as we reached the street. Now we rebuild, I said simply. Everything he tried to destroy, we put back together. Better. And stronger than before. But even as I spoke those words, I knew rebuilding would be more complicated. Some things, once broken, could never be fully restored. They could only be transformed into something different, something that carried the scars of what had been done. The months that followed Jackson's sentencing were filled with practical necessities. Vanessa worked with law enforcement to trace the stolen funds through the maze of shell companies. The recovery process was slow, frustrating. A significant portion of the money had been spent on Sienna's luxury lifestyle and could never be reclaimed. Designer clothes, exotic vacations, they leave no assets to seize. In the end, we recovered approximately 62% of what had been stolen from me and my mother. Not everything, but enough to stabilize what Jackson had tried to destroy. I used a portion of those funds to pay off my mother's brownstone completely, then worked with Martin to establish a trust that would protect the property from any future attempts at fraud. The house that had nearly been lost was now secured, giving my mother genuine peace for the first time since my father's death. Thornfield Security Solutions required a different